fingers crossed, all the rest of it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first virtual panel at the South Coast Lesfic Hangout. I am delighted to be kickstarting this all. I am Natalie Miller-Snell. I am host of Seize the Day podcast, and I'm also a personal and business coach where I help people achieve their goals. But today I'm here in a different guise. I am supporting Amanda and Claire in their virtual endeavours and hosting a few panels. Now, let me just let you know, we are live on Facebook. We are actually 20 seconds ahead of you. So I'm going to do my very best to check through the questions that come in and get the panel to answer the questions. If we don't get to respond to you, and if I miss it, please accept my apologies. We'll dive into the group afterwards and we'll answer any questions that are there. So without further ado, let's meet the gorgeous bunch that are here. We have on TJ Richards, Jessica Jeffries, Fiona Thraille, and Lise Gold. What a delightful bunch. And I'm now going to hand it over to these lovely individuals for a little bit of a brief introduction about themselves. And then we'll kick off into the questions. So exciting times. Let's start with you, Lise.
Okay, hello. I'm a romance author. I've written 12, I think. I believe this is my 12th coming up. 12 romance novels. And all of them are out on audiobook, apart from one which will be out soon.
Love it. Okay, over to you, Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Jeffries, also known as Anna Clements. I narrate just about every genre, actually, but I've narrated about 13 lesbian fiction books, 40-something fiction and non-fiction books. I've been a narrator for 3 years full-time, 4 or 5 years since I sort of moved across, but that's a whole nother story. And I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it.
That's brilliant. I have to say, I'm excited to hear all of the voices as well. Fiona, how about you?
Hello, hi, I'm Fiona Thraille. I am an audiobook narrator and producer, and I think at the moment it stands at 25 that I've done. And I'm also involved in podcasting as well. I'm a podcast producer and have my own Dashing Onions audio, which is short stories.
Oh, we should talk afterwards. We won't bring the podcast in now, but let's talk afterwards. And over to you, TJ.
Hi, I'm TJ, and I am a part-time narrator. So I've been narrating part-time since 2016, and I have just finished my 21st book for Lisa, which should be coming out soon, fingers crossed.
Wow, amazing. Yes, and we'll definitely talk about the partnership in a moment. It's fantastic to be here with you, and it's fantastic to be hosting and moderating this panel. So let's kick off with, I've tried narrating. It's online somewhere, I'll send you the link. It's really hard. I mean, I didn't appreciate how much I breathed, I took a breath, whatever the right expression would be. So for everyone listening, how did you get into narrating first off? And what are some great tips to help you become a good narrator or a great narrator? And can anybody do it? Over to you, Jessica.
I was going to say, I'm happy to jump in. So the long story is that at 19, I decided I wanted to be an actress. And back in the 1950s, musical theatre wasn't really a thing, and there was only one university that kind of ran a course that did that sort of thing. So I went home and I told my parents at 19 that I wanted to be a singer, and I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to use my voice for a living. And my mother said, "Oh, you have to be really good to do that." So I went to university and studied economics, and was in accountancy and finance for 20-something years, and realized that life's really short and we need to follow our dreams. So I bought a microphone, started messing around at home. I did 5 years of classical singing, thinking that certificates and education would make me feel empowered. And I'm still not very sure how I fell into audiobooks, but I started in voiceover doing corporate narration. If you go as a new employee to the Kellogg's factory in Bulgaria, it's my voice that tells you how to get started in the company.
Love that.
And then I discovered audiobooks and I just fell in love. I think people as voices are either short form or long form people. I think it's a personality thing. I think you can do it. You can certainly be taught to do it. I know there are coaches who teach people how to narrate audiobooks, but I think it's also has to be a passion, because you spend a lot of time by yourself, but you get to be all the voices and all the characters and embody the author's story, you know. So it's fantastic. Sorry, I won't say too much because there's not a lot more to say, but I absolutely love it, as we all do, you know. It really is a passion thing. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I love that. And TJ?
I was tricked into becoming a narrator. It was a trick. My wife, I think it was a trick to get me busy with something so that my wife could go fishing more. We go camping quite a lot, you know, typical lesbians, we love camping. And my wife is very dyslexic, and our van that we took, we've got a new van since, but didn't have a working radio. So my job during the long trips was to read a book. And so I would read to her, and we'd drive down the road and do our camping bits. And then she took up fishing, sorry. And that meant a lot of early mornings, a lot of sort of afternoons. Like I wouldn't see her till like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon because she's busy taking pictures with random fish down by the bank. I don't get it, but she loves it. So she suggested, why don't you just look at, you know, doing audiobooks? You read to me all the time. Like you're pretty good at it. Go read it. And I was like, well, first of all, you're biased. You have to tell me I'm good at it. Otherwise we get a divorce. That's how it works. And also you can't just be an audiobook narrator. Don't be daft. And then I Googled it and listened to some other people talking about it and did some research and found out that actually if you have some passion and the right equipment and the right sort of know-how, you can be an audiobook narrator. There's a lot of learning you need to do it well. So I got the basics, started practicing, started messing about, started upgrading and training, getting some training as I got a little bit better. And now it's a lovely side hustle that I get to do. And the best part is that I get free books from my favorite authors, and I get to hang out with my favorite authors. Like as a reading fan, that's not the right word, but as a huge fan of Lesfic, being able to hang out with my authors that I love and actually be like, what you been up to? Like it's so cool. I love it. It's a fangirl's dream.
That's brilliant. Actually, I didn't ask you this, Jessica, we'll come back to you in a moment. What's the best tip or the best thing that you've learnt along the way to do good narration, if that's even a sentence, to be a good narrator? Sorry, to you, TJ.
Oh, sorry. I think the best advice really is to invest in yourself. You can start off and think you know everything. I can guarantee you don't know everything, because I've been doing it for a while now and I'm still learning new things. So clearly nobody knows everything. Invest in training, invest in equipment, invest in learning how to use your equipment. I took a course on my recording software that I bought because I thought, I'm struggling with making it just work. I just want it to work. And it was a 2-hour-long course, 1-to-1. And by the end of it, I could do so many more things with my software that actually made my life so much easier. That if I hadn't taken the time to do that, I would have still been, laboring away in my little dark booth trying to fix things. So absolutely invest in yourself, get training, and upgrade your stuff as you need it. But you don't need to start off with like the 3,000-pound microphone.
Yeah, that's a good bit of advice actually. And you, Fiona, the same in terms of how you got into it, tips and so on?
Yeah, I very similar maybe to Anna. I went to I studied drama at university and I wanted to be an actor, and just life kind of intervened and I ended up, like they say, you should have a backup job. And I was doing the backup job and another backup job in order to, one day I'm going to, and I never, just life sort of went that way. And it was only when I finally found, in fact, audio drama online and suddenly realized that you can do things online, that then I fell into that world, got training, and then I was incredibly lucky that someone from that world was also a writer, and he put his audiobook up for audition and I got it, and he'd already laid out for a producer an editor who was also a good friend of mine. So I kind of went in this it was a really lovely bubble to be introduced to ACX with people I'd worked with before, who I knew as friends. They did all the hard work in sort of sorting it all out. And I was having training in sort of the background engineering side. So by the time then that another book came along and another book, I kind of had a very gentle introduction. And I just, I love reading audiobooks. And I think what Anna was saying about it's this personality thing that I really like. I love to be able to do all the characters and to have all that interaction and to go through that story with them. But also it's rather than I've done a bit of commercial work, but that tends to be very much, it will come up, you've got 2 minutes to do it, you've got to get it in, and it's very, very deadline, very, very fast moving. Whereas with this, when you've got other things happening in your life or caring responsibilities and so on, it's been something that I can timetable out. I know exactly when everything, I feel more kind of in control rather than sort of scrambling for the next job every 2 minutes kind of thing. And so that suits me personally. I love that. And it's
a really good take on it. Yeah, I really like, and seeing you smile as well. You clearly enjoy it. You're beaming. It's absolutely magic. Yeah. Lise, have you ever tried narration?
No. I've heard myself talk on camera. I actually sing, and I have no problem hearing myself sing, but if I hear myself speak, it's just so cringing. I would never, ever even give it a go myself. No, absolutely not.
You've got a lovely voice. You've got a really lovely voice.
No, and I have this weird accent as well. It's not really from anywhere, and no, I would definitely not even try it, but that's what the professionals are for, so that's good.
Okay, look, we've got a couple of things coming on Facebook, so I'm going to pick up on those straight away. A few hellos from, I think, Carol, and I missed one down there. I don't want to click on it too much, can I? Mark saying hi as well. Claire. Oh, Claire, hi! The organiser. How do you remember all of the different voices as you read the dialogue? Good question. Okay, let's go. I'm going to not go the same order this time. So let's start with you, TJ.
I am a proponent of the old highlighter trick. I'm getting away from it a little bit now, but what really helps me is I go through as I'm reading the book and I assign each character a color, so all their dialogue's in a certain color. And then I've got a little notebook where I write down, like, okay, the main character is Cam and she's in this age and she sounds like this and she's from this area. And I'll try and work out what I think their voice will sound like. And then I'll normally do like an audio clip of them in that voice saying something. So as I'm, dipping in and out of the booth and doing different recording sessions, I can listen back to it and go, all right, that's what she sounds like, and I'll go from there. But the highlighting is really good for my brain because I know who's coming up next, but it takes so damn long to go through a book and highlight all the audio. So sometimes I don't do all of it and I make one or two more mistakes and I just edit those out. It doesn't actually take a lot of time to do it without the highlighters. So maybe I'm moving away from highlighters.
Evolving
like a Pikachu.
Oh, great. I could talk about that all day long. Fiona.
Yeah, I do it very similarly to TJ actually, but not, I don't highlight the text, but I keep, when I read through for the first time, I kind of make my own chart of all the characters and kind of assign, because at some point in the book it'll say kind of where they're coming from. And I've found so far, fingers crossed, there only tend to be an interaction of a few at a time until you usually get to the finale, and that's when you get loads of them coming in. So by then, hopefully I can remember. But similarly, each one I kind of assign a little phrase to get you into their head as well, just like a little catchphrase for each one, which needn't necessarily be in the book, just kind of even sometimes a swear word that just gets you into the head of that character at the time.
And you say that to yourself?
Yeah, before setting up, just sit there and kind of like, and then you're in it,
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. And how about you, Anna? Would you like me to call you Anna or Jessica?
I'm happy with either, to be honest. I'll answer to both. I'm very similar to both of those. When I got into this, I got in with a very cavalier attitude of how hard can it be? And I think if you don't come into it with that attitude, you'd never do it, because if you knew what I now know, I would never have started. But not unlike TJ and Fiona, I use a software called iAnnotate. And so when I prep the book, which actually often takes me longer than narrating the book, I highlight the characters, I'll highlight information about that they talk when they talk about themselves, when other characters describe them. I often note down who they might remind me of, and I cast all of my characters, from the lead characters through to the lady who brings the tea. You know, my sister's in it, the Queen is in it, you know, my impression of Meryl Streep, Jack Nicholson, and I pick people and I cast them as my impression of those people. And I do the same with iAnnotate has a little sound clip device, so that the first time that person comes up, you can attach perhaps the first phrase they say, or a phrase that reminds you of them. And often, as Fiona was saying, I'll use phrases to remind me of a particular accent, or to get me back into that frame of mind, because obviously you're going through as the narrator, depending on the point of view of the book, and every time somebody comes up, that's a very different person, and you have to embody each of those characters as they arrive. So it's a constantly changing landscape, which is exciting.
That's so exciting, amazing. We've got quite a few questions coming through, so I'm going to focus on these if that's okay, but it does kind of lend to what we were going to talk about anyway. I've missed one just go by, so forgive me, but it was relating to appointing a narrator on your book. So Lise, we'll talk with you on this one, in terms of how you ensure, or how you work with, to get the characters as you wrote them, or does that not happen in the case of, forgive me, I've lost the words on the panel. Do you get involved with how the book is narrated effectively? And we've got here, Emma has asked, and Felice, what do you look for in a narrator? Lauren said she's having this panel, it's very interesting. And I'll come on to the others in a moment. So Lise, how is that for you in terms of a process? How do you choose a narrator, and how involved are you within that?
Right, well, it's really, really hard, because if you imagine readers read a book and they imagine in their heads what the characters sound like. So for you as an author, if you've actually written the book, that's way worse even. So you just have to let that go, because nobody is ever going to sound like you think your characters would sound like. And so, I mean, if you go through ACX, for example, you can listen to narrator samples, so you can get something close. Or, I mean, personally, I've always put out auditions, so then narrators read a little part of the script you've uploaded, and you can pick one that you like. Or, for example, I think TJ, I just met you somewhere, and then I listened to your sample, and then I thought, okay, that's
Salted
great.
you on the street.
Fantastic. And I've worked with Anna as well. I think
Lise, can I tell you?
I'm not quite sure.
Forgive me for interrupting, but you've got quite a few people that are saying you've got a very sexy voice. Just putting it out there, just to let you know. Yeah, okay. You'll see it later. Yeah. Oh, so that's really, so were you involved with the process? And perhaps I'll link this up with the two of you, Lise and TJ, because you've worked together a few times. In terms of, you've written this book, you've got your characters' voices in your mind, TJ, then you come involved. Do you own that, or do you get involved and talk about what you thought the book would look like and sound like?
Lisa's really good at just sort of letting me go and interpreting it, which is terrifying. Because I know how much effort that, you know, authors put into books. And in fact, actually, Lisa, you and I met at the South Coast Lesfic Hangout last year, I believe. That's when we met. Yes. We met through Anna. So it's a whole group of friends here. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, she's really good at just sort of letting me interpret it. But you're very aware the whole time that you're doing it, that this is somebody's baby. You know, they have poured their heart and soul and hours and hours and hours of creativity into this. And you don't want to fuck it up, you know, to be quite honest. Like, it's a big responsibility. But you also need to be aware that you can't push yourself too far. I know my limitations. I'm not an amazing voice work person. Like, Fee has some amazing voices when she does her books. I am nowhere near as talented as her when it comes to the actual different voices, but I have a cast of voices that I use. And then finding, you know, the right voice and the right accent and, you know, the right sort of attitude that goes with it. Lisa does a great job of describing the characters to make them feel real. So it makes it easier for me to try and match the right voice and the right persona with it. But yeah, she's a dream to work with.
Oh, I love that.
So is TJ. I have to say, like, so I met TJ and we talked, and I knew she was a narrator, and then I listened to her samples, and it's completely different from what she sounds like when she talks. And I have this character in my book, Living Ella, and I couldn't believe it was her, because it sounded so completely different to what she talks like in real life, and yet it was like really consistent and natural, and it actually felt like that character. And so it starts evolving as an author. It starts evolving in your head, that how you thought they sounded before, they actually start sounding the way your narrator does it. And
I've
that's
invaded your
happened every
brain.
single time. Yeah.
It's like watching a movie before reading the book. You maybe get there, I suppose I don't know. Well, that's my take on it anyway.
I have,
Okay,
I have an author that I did a series of 5 books, but they were about different couples in each of the 5 books, and she'd only written 3 when I first met her. So I started doing book 1, book 2, book 3 as she was writing books 4 and 5. And by the time she got to book 4 and 5, she said she was writing characters knowing that I was going to narrate them. She was describing them knowing how I was going to make it sound, that's a really lovely thing too, when you get that symbiosis between you, and you get to know people. That it's all about communication and relationships, which is lovely.
Have you had that too, Fiona? That kind of connection? Do you work with repeat authors?
Absolutely, yeah, and it is very much, it is all about communication. And I think quite a lot, picking up on what TJ was saying as well, about working with Lise, that there's a certain amount of trust involved, because you are picking up someone's baby that they have worked possibly for years and years on. And I think a lot of the major communication is in that sort of that first 15 part, of knowing that you might not be able to replicate the voices in the writer's head completely, but knowing that you're both looking at them from the same direction. And I think once you've got enough trust on both sides, really, that, okay, is this what you want? We'll go with this, then it's really easy to, well, hopefully straightforward to move forward. And yeah, it's lovely. The more that you start working with someone, the nicer and easier it gets.
I love that. Okay, let's talk money. Well, you don't have to talk specifics, but let's talk about the lucrative nature of audiobooks and what it kind of costs. We spoke offline before we came onto this. If I'm an author or if I'm a publisher, first off, how do I go about finding a narrator? And then secondly, what's the different kind of cost and distribution aspects and options in terms of how you put an audiobook out there? And does it end up being lucrative for both parties? It's a bigger kind of area now that's growing and developing. So let's start with Fiona.
Right. There are so many options in so many ways. To look at the financial side, you can see why when you see, for example, the minimum kind of rate that's standard for in the US for I was going to say equity, but I'm trying to think for
SAG-AFTRA.
That's it, thank you, SAG-AFTRA, would be over $250 per finished hour. And that does sound, horrendously expensive. And it sounds like, we sort of, well, the butler will deal with that kind of thing. But actually, when you actually break down the amount of time it takes to finish an hour, I think ACX themselves say about 6 hours to every 1 hour. But it can be quite variable depending on the book, depending on the vocabulary, the kind of characterizations, all sorts of things. The sheer amount of time, when you actually then divide that down into the amount of hours that you're putting in to produce that 1 hour, it is actually a lot. And for many narrators, they're also hiring editors as well. So they have to then, and proofreaders, proof listeners. So there are expenses that come out as well. You've got that option, which is the per finished hour. You also have the royalty share option, which is where both you and the narrator will receive 20% of royalties for the next 7 years. And so then it's really a question of how many books are sold, again, because you're looking at that kind of financially over 7 years. Is it going to be enough to cover the expenses of making it in the first place? So sometimes narrators might sound a bit intrusive if they're saying, you know, can we ask for your figures and your projected figures for this kind of thing? But it's not for that, it's just simply to see whether they can actually afford to do it. But more recently, ACX have been offering a hybrid scheme. So you can then have a certain amount, a low amount per finished hour, but also do the royalty scheme as well. And I think that certainly works quite well for narrators, because then those expenses that you might be paying out for, you can cover at least while you're doing the work and so on. But of course, ACX is also not the only place. There are other Spoken Realms audio, there are other places that are now, of course, naturally just zipping out of my head.
We'll come back to it when you can jump in later.
Yeah, but so yeah, I hope that kind of answers.
That's fantastic, really great. And Jessica and TJ, same for you, is it? A similar?
Just following on from what Fiona was saying, so there's Spoken Realms, there's Find a Way, there's Audiobooks Unleashed. There are several new companies, particularly, who've just taken on the idea that they can release the book for you. It has to be I've forgotten what the word is. You can do it dedicated through ACX, and then you sell only on Audible, or you can have it, and I've forgotten what the word is,
wider distribution.
Thank you.
I don't know, I can't remember the word either.
No, so it's this specific distribution or a wider distribution, whereby you then go to libraries, to all the other, Storytel and all the other places, Spotify and so on, all the other places where you can sell audiobooks that isn't just Audible. And that's actually important to think about too, whether you want to be tied to, so you get a different amount of royalty share on your book depending on your distribution choice. And so I do some books. Sometimes I'm bilingual and I do books in Spanish. As a Spaniard, you can't go on to ACX. So ACX is only available to the UK, Ireland, Canada, and the US. So again, that when you're bringing an author into the system, you have to think about which best way to then distribute the book and get the book into the system for them. So there's also often lots of things to take into account right at the beginning before you even start discussing how best to narrate the book.
TJ, the same?
I mean, I can't follow on from that, really. They've covered all the salient points. Yeah, I think if you're trying to do a really good product, you need to be paying for an editor and a proofer. I mean, just as you would when you're writing the book, like you get somebody to read it and check and things like that, because stuff starts to slip through your own eyes because you kind of know how it should go. And it's the same with audiobooks, and that can be quite an expense that the narrator will generally pay up front, and whether that then is covered by the per finished hour rate that the author is paying, or by the hybrid agreement, which will generally cover the editing costs, and that offsets that. So then the risk really is just about, can you sell enough to make enough back in royalties that you cover the own hours that you've spent in a little padded room talking to yourself.
Padded room.
Yeah, it works.
I love that.
Sorry, just to go back over words for people, it's exclusive distribution will take you through Audible, but non-exclusive distribution will allow you to go elsewhere, and basically has no geographical restrictions. So it allows you then to sell throughout Europe, throughout all sorts of other places that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get hold of. So it's exclusive and non-exclusive distribution.
Okie dokie. And Lise, over to you from the author point of view. How do you find it in terms of its finance and then the lucrative side of it, without divulging?
I think a lot of authors, when they first start out with audiobooks, would go for a safe option, such as a royalty share, because I think a lot of the audiobook listeners are different from your book readers. So it's a different market entirely. So you kind of have to start all over building up that base of listeners. And so after a while, when you have a base of listeners, then you can start going on to, for example, paper finished hour, because you know your books will sell. So I would recommend to authors who are just starting out to try and get a hybrid deal in the beginning, just to keep the risk low, because it can be very expensive and you want to know that you can make the money back. And of course you want to make a nice profit. So, but saying that, I have to say, for me, audiobooks have been quite lucrative. So it's probably like a third or a quarter of my income.
That's interesting. And I find it fascinating you were saying, so you believe it's a different audience that listen to the books compared to a new set of people. You'll have, no doubt, your dedicated readers who would automatically buy the audio, but then you've also got another base. That's really interesting. So different.
Yeah, I think there's lots of people out there who prefer to listen than to read. And those are not necessarily the people you would have on your social media as your readers. So you just need to find the new, is it listenership? I don't know what you call it.
Let's go with that. I think that's delightful. Absolutely amazing. Amanda asks, which follows on the back of this for you, Lise, do you find yourself writing a book differently to the way you would have written it if you were planning to make it into an audiobook? That's a good question. Good question, Amanda. Hi.
Yes and no. Yes, I've learned from my own audiobooks because I've had to proof them, and I think as an author you learn a lot from proofing your own books. I think the biggest mistake I made before was not reading them out loud to myself. And now that I've listened to my previous audiobooks, I do write differently, yes, because I want my books to be natural, and I think you want to get better as an author, and you actually learn a lot from listening to your own books. So I do write slightly differently now.
And what does that mean in terms of the different slightly, is it more breath? Is it more pause? More dialogue?
Probably a bit more dialogue.
Okay.
May I follow on from that?
Please.
Sorry, just somebody once, a conference I once went to, and they said that the difference between writing and narrating is that we write in sentences, but we speak in thoughts. And so when you go to narrate a book, I often jump punctuation. I'll often run through till the end of the thought, which isn't necessarily the end of a single sentence. And that's really interesting from a narrator's point of view. When you're listening to a story, you don't necessarily speak in whole sentences and stop at the full stop. You'll often run through or pause in different places. And also attributions, when it says, do you want tea? He said, yes, please, she said. Milk? He said, yes, she said. Well, when you narrate that, the she said, he said, she said, he said gets kind of, and when you're reading, you skip them because it's he said, she said, and in the narration you're doing the voices, so the listener knows. So a lot of the authors I now work with will comment, ones I've worked with several times who are now writing books, will say that they write with either differently, he whispered or he suggested or whatever, or not put it at all, because they know that the reader knows and the listener knows, so it was unnecessary perhaps. And I think that also is a progression from listening to your own books back, and you suddenly go, sorry, I'm presuming, I wouldn't presume to have, but that's what I've heard.
Would you agree,
It's
Lise?
true. I throw punctuation completely out the window when you're doing it, because you are doing it in thoughts, aren't you? And how the person would say it as they're breathing or running or whatever it is that they're doing. So you do sort of just ignore punctuation. And I always hope I get it right, and that the author hasn't spent 2 days struggling where to put that comma, and I've just gone, screw the comma, we're not doing it.
I suppose it relates to, it's a bit of artistic license, isn't it? So if you were acting, there's a level of ad lib in occasion that comes through, or you have a screenplay, don't you? That's an adaptation from a book. So there's a level of change that needs to take place. And I assume an author perhaps expects that level of artistic license tweak.
Absolutely.
So.
Okay, so we got a question through from Mark earlier today, Mark Rochford from Crawley. He asks, do you do a see-through with the author before? And this is for you, Lise. And for the narrators, when you record, how much do you record at a time, assuming you can't record for 3 hours straight, or however long the book is? Well, yeah, what's your maximum period? So at least maybe, do you do a bit of a read through? I suppose that's part of the audition process you were mentioning earlier, isn't it?
Well, it depends. If I've worked with narrators before, then I don't do anything really. Then I just trust the narrator to just, like, you know, do a great job, because I know they're great at what they do. I've written a series, a Compass series, and I've used the same narrator throughout the series, because I wanted to keep the consistency in there. And so then I don't do it at all. But if I'll have a book with, let's say, lots of different accents in, so I had a book called A Cruise, and they're cruising around the world, so there are lots of different accents. And yes, I definitely did a call with the narrator then and talked her through everything, because that can be quite hard. So
okay.
And I have to say, like, I'm not that picky, because not everyone can get all the accents right, and it's absolutely fine if they're not spot on. But it's nice to know that they're not all going to sound the same if there are a lot of characters in a book. Okay,
I like that. And then to Anna, let's start with you in terms of how much do you record at any one given time? Do you ever test yourself? How far can I go?
No, sorry. I've recorded in studio and at home. So I have a professional studio and I record at home, and my working hours are 9 till 12 and 2 till 5. But in those hours, I'm either recording and or doing all my admin. So depending on what the day holds, then how long I record for. I'll usually record for an hour and a half, have a cup of tea, record for an hour and a half. But when you go into studios, so when you work with, who have I worked with, Hachette or HarperCollins, they have their own studios in London where you actually have to go and work with an engineer and a director. And so you go in at 9:30 and you don't get out till 5:30, and you have an hour for lunch, and in between you're sat in front of the microphone. So, wow. and they have 3 days to do a 12-hour book. So you're just recording. And there is nothing else, because that's what they're paying you for. You are being paid to record. Whereas I find at home, without an editor and a director, and there's a lot of hats to wear. You're checking yourself to make sure you're actually reading what's on the page and not making it up as you go along. Because every so often your brain says what you think it should say rather than what it actually says. So you have to pay a lot of attention, and having to keep an eye on yourself is quite wearing. In a tired sense, it is a very tiring job. So you do have to make sure you take breaks. You have to make sure you stand up once in a while. There are books sometimes, if they're 4 or 6 hours long, I'll record them standing up, because I'm aware that sitting down, I have a very different energy. My non-fiction books I record standing up because they require a constant passion throughout, whereas fiction books ebb and flow. And so it's nice sometimes to have, if you've got a good day, then you'll do a 3-hour stint. If you're having a bad day, you're lucky to get 20 minutes out. And you just, life gets in the way, but there are deadlines. So, it's lovely to be a freelancer, but it is the luck of the draw sometimes.
I love what you just said about putting words in. I notice that with my son all the time when he's reading. He just makes it up what he wants the story to say.
Yeah.
Slight aside. Fiona, is that the same for you in terms of when you record?
It is actually, yeah. And I think it's quite important, similar with sort of standard acting, to do a warm-up beforehand and a cool down afterwards, because then you're keeping your voice able to keep going, because there is a certain amount of stamina, and there's also an awful lot of drinking of water before, even if possible a couple of days before you start a project, so that you're really hydrated by the time you get to it, and that helps a lot. But yeah, I think also the thing is, might spend 3 hours in the booth, but to get actual finished audio from that 3 hours, it's not going to be 3 hours of finished audio. It'll be maybe 1.5 hours if I'm, doing well and I'm happy, because I think most narrators do use punch and roll. So you narrate and then you come to something where you make a mistake or you go off in your head, and then you bring the cursor back to say the phrase before, and press record, and the software actually plays back what you just said in your ears, so that you can go along with the previous phrase and come straight in with the next one. So it's a really fluid way of working once you kind of get used to hearing it. So by the end, you can have a completely finished, it'll need tightening up, but a finished piece of audio that you can then edit down easily, or the editor can work on easily. But it means then that there is a lot of, there is still time in the booth doing other things, trying different, if it's dialogue, trying different comebacks, going back and doing it again. So yeah, you wouldn't be getting one finished straight reader, in one go, unless some people can maybe, but I can't.
It's amazing. It's something I don't think about. And the same for you, TJ. Is that the same?
Yeah, I mean, I try to do about 2 hours in the booth at a time, but as Fee said, a lot of it is me going back and correcting mistakes, or trying different energy levels and dialogue. Sometimes I'll do a whole scene and realize I was doing the wrong voice, so I have to go back and redo it again. Or again, sometimes your brain just kind of goes somewhere else, and you suddenly realize you're not paying attention. Really, you're sort of reading it robotically, and you're like, well, that's going to sound crap. I need to go back and redo that. So yeah, I'll be in there for 2 hours at a time recording, but I'll probably end up with about an hour and a half of good audio that I can then send to my editor. But yeah, anything more than that, and my voice starts to go. And you can't, if you've got an afternoon recording session that you've lined up, and you're like, right, I'm going to do it like Anna does in the morning and evening. If you break your voice in the morning session by going too long, you might not have recovered by the evening session, and then your youthful, spry main character sounds like a grizzly old man who's just smoked 20 cigarettes. So you have to make sure that you're looking after your voice as you go and not overtaxing yourself.
And am I correct in understanding all of you use an editor?
Sorry,
Yeah.
Natalie, may I just go through the sort of the process, just to outline the whole thing? So, for example, when I worked with Lisa, I applied through an ACX audition, and Lisa listened to all the auditions and then sent me a message saying, I'd like you to do the job. And so then I had to send her 15 minutes worth of her book, which is usually the first chapter or the first 2 chapters if the first chapter is too short. And in those 15 minutes, hopefully, she gets an idea of what the main characters are going to sound like, what my point of view narration sounds like. If there are other voices within the book that she feels she wants to listen to, she can then say, could you just give me a sample of the grandmother from page 37, and so on. And when she signs off on that first 15, it's then over to me to narrate the entire book. So I will then narrate the entire book, send it to my editor, Morrison Ellis, who proofs it, edits it, so he tightens it up as Fiona described, because I've sent him a full punched and rolled entire book. And then when we have totally mastered files, we upload them to ACX, and then Lisa sits down and listens. And that's the first time she'll get a chance to, I'm aware that often with first-time narrators, they're under the impression that perhaps they're going to get every chapter, or they're going to get a chance to listen to every single voice as I do it and approve it before I continue. And the process needs to be, there is a lot of handing over your baby, but it is a process that as a performer, we need to kind of fall into and stay in. I can't run 2 books at a time. So when I'm doing a book, I do nothing else till I finish that book. And so it is a single process as far as I'm concerned. And the author does have to let go somewhat and wait, because there's not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point.
Okay, and it's the same for you, Fiona and TJ. You do 1 book at a time as well.
Yeah,
I'd never considered that before.
Yeah, so I mean, I do 1 book at a time, mainly because I'm a little scatterbrained, and if I try to do 2, I'll start combining voices and characters, which isn't good for anybody. But what I will sometimes start to edit a book or prep a book as I'm getting towards the end of a book, and it's getting to the point where it's just going over to the editor, and I'm waiting for my pickups, the corrections. They'll come back and say, you made up 3 paragraphs here. This is what it's supposed to say, and I'll have to re-record that. So while I'm waiting for that part of the process, right before I upload to the author, I'll start prepping the next book. So I do kind of overlap a little bit, but same, I can't do 2 at a time. And I know some narrators do. I just I'm not that, I can't. I don't have enough mental capacity to do it.
So are you, Fiona?
There's also
sorry, no, please.
I think there's also a certain rhythm and pace that each book goes at, and I personally, then you go back into the booth the next day and you back into that thing again. And I think if you were doing 2 books, I know some narrators do, but I personally prefer, I find it's the consistency then is there in the pace, that you've got this, nice romance bubbling along there, and you've not suddenly got this thriller that's over here doing this, and so you're not getting kind of jarred between the two. Yeah.
And from the author's perspective, how do you find it waiting to get those chapters through? Is it painful, what's it going to sound like? Or is it not too, have you got used to it now and you're used to working with particular narrators?
No, I'm used to it. I mean, they're the professionals, and I just trust that it's going to sound good when I get it back, and it always does. So not at all. I mean, I'm anxious to hear it because I'm excited, but that's the only reason.
Love it. Okay, let's talk sexy times. I'm keen to know the juicy bits in stories, because there are a few sometimes. There's not in all of them, but there are a few. So from a narration point of view, how do you find reading them? And has there been any parts that have made you really blush? You don't have to say the book or anything, but just, has there ever been a time that's made you blush? And is it okay to ask this question? Because I'm really keen to know, and I hope everyone else is. Who shall I start with? Fiona.
Yeah, I have blushed, a few times. And, you kind of have to stop and go, blimey, and then kind of go back in. But it is acting, but at the same time, there's an element, with acting, I guess. I'm sure psychoanalysts would have a field day, that how far you are inside a character when you're acting. And so sometimes, you do kind of get embarrassed.
I love it. I've always wondered. How about you, TJ?
I love the juicy bits. The part that sometimes makes me blush is when I was very new and I was very excited. So I'd be like, Mom, I just narrated this book. You got to listen to it, but skip chapter 5. Don't listen to chapter 5, whatever you do. So that does make you blush. Sometimes you learn new things doing the steamy bits, and that can be fun. But I think actually, and I'm going to do a little bit here, Lisa. Lisa's latest book that's coming out in audiobook soon, The Scent of Rome, she's got like a 3-chapter long steamy bit, and that made it warm.
I think everyone's downloading, pre-ordering now.
It reminded me of like the typical lesbian 72-hour first date. It was warm in the booth that day.
And can I say, sorry, before we jump on to you, Jessica, have I been calling you Lise and you're Lisa? Oh, I asked everybody.
No, you're actually, well, it's Norwegian, Lisa or Lisa or Lisa. It doesn't matter.
Sorry, on to you, Jessica.
The same. I think the reason I started narrating lesbian fiction was because I love it, and what's not to love. So the steamy bits are as good as the terrible bits and the sad bits and the can't believe she left, and really. And I'll sometimes be reading a chapter and as Sarah walked away, and I'll go, no. I've prepped the book, I know what's happening, but sometimes you're so caught up in the moment that it's like, and luckily I can edit that bit out. But it is, and it's the same with the steamy bits, you're just loving every minute and you get to be it and do it, it's fab.
I love that take on it. I love that. Okay, we've got a question come through from Jill Warren. As narrators, are you tempted to use different accents for characters to ensure difference between the main characters? I see shaking of head. Let's start with you,
sorry.
Jessica.
Sorry, TJ said earlier on, basically the author has done the job already. We don't get to make stuff up. So the author will have told us if somebody's from Manchester, they're from Manchester. If they are, a Norwegian professor, you have to go and be a Norwegian professor. There's no pretending, there's no making it up. But when you have a very straight book, I did a couple of Kiki Archer books, and hers are always based in Great Britain. And it's a generic, not always, but it's a generic feeling of an English person. And so I then get to pick. But accents aren't just about country. they're about attitude, they're about personality, they're about being shy or proud or jealous, or there are so many things that come into our voices that separate people one from another. So I was thinking earlier when somebody was speaking about a job I had to do with 5 Russian men having a fight in a bar. And when I first came across it in the book, 3 of the men were from the story, and they met these 2 other men that were only in this fight scene and then left again. But suddenly I had 5 men all speaking in Russian accents that I had to make different, and it really upset me initially. And so I went to my coach and said, I don't know how to do this. And he said, yes, you do. If they weren't all Russian, you wouldn't be thinking twice about it. So what's the problem? And of course, I realized, one guy was short and one guy had a chip on his shoulder and one guy was the one holding the knife and one guy, and everybody's different in that attitude that you bring to that. You can tell who's who. It isn't as, you do have to think about it and you have to work at it, but accents aren't just about being a foreigner, in inverted commas, they're about being a person, and every person is very different.
Love that. And you, Fiona, the same?
Yeah, no, I'd agree, absolutely. The only thing I would say is when you do have 2 main characters or any number of characters, it is about finding those things that do make them different, and to make, maybe the sort of intonation or the I guess sort of musically, what they're at, or the way that they do. It's part of the preparation process, is very much, I think, making defined characters around what the author's already given you in there, and it's usually all there in the text anyway. And most authors, when they're writing, they will write someone with a different rhythm. Sort of someone will come out with very staccato, kind of very forceful sentences, and someone else will be much more flowery. And so it's kind of tuning into what they're doing as well.
I love that. TJ, same?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I mean, I do get a secret thrill when the authors write like a small side character that doesn't really have a lot of descriptions, like hard descriptions, and you can kind of have a bit of artistic license with it. I love to stick random Southerners in books. Only where they fit, of course, but like if they're not really described and it's just this person that comes in for one scene and then they kind of go off. I do like to, I love my Southern accent. I'm from Mississippi originally, so I do try to get like a Mississippi girl in a book where I can, just because I feel like we don't get out very much.
Love that. Sorry, go on, Fiona.
As an extra thing though, that's something that is really helpful for narrators to hear from authors. Because I did one book which I didn't realise that the author was writing another one and almost finished. And there was a small character in one scene, and I gave them it was a Scottish accent that I wasn't all that familiar, but it was only like 2 sentences, and so I practiced it and gave it, and it fitted perfectly. And then they said, oh, by the way, there's a second book to do, and that character then was like one of the main team, and so then I had to spend ages actually properly researching up this accent to keep it going. So it is really helpful, especially with authors where they're doing recurring characters. If they don't appear much in the first book and you are hoping to use the same narrator, please let them know, oh, by the way, this character is going to be large in the next one.
Don't wait till the last chapter to mention they're Irish. Tell us up front.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So for anyone listening who wants to start out narrating, and by the way, can I just say, as a narrator, I think you'll rock, because it's really, I mean, having just tried it a little bit, it's really hard. It's incredible, particularly doing the accents. And as an author as well, when you put your heart and soul into things, it's magic to read the stuff on the page. So I think you're all incredible. For anyone who's starting out and wants to narrate, what kind of basic equipment should they need if they just want to test it without investing heaps of cash? If they want to just try it out, a lot of people are looking for different careers now, aren't they? There's been so much change. What does one need to start out narrating? Over to you, TJ.
I think if you're just starting out and you want to practice and understand whether it's something for you, because like Anna and Fia both said, you know, it sounds easy sort of when you think about it at first, and then you get into it and you're like, wow, there is a lot more work here than I expected. So it isn't for everybody. So don't go out and get like the top of the range stuff if you're not sure this is for you yet. But at the same time, don't sell yourself short. So it's kind of a middle road. What I would suggest, in my own opinion, is, you know, they have like podcasting kits that you can get that have a little, like an interface unit that connects to your computer, an XLR microphone, just a small one that you can practice and try reading for an hour long straight and see, you know, can you do that 2 times a day for a week? Can you do that 3 times a day for a week? Like, is that something you actually have the stamina to be able to do? And once you get to the point where you think, yeah, this is actually something that I want to do, then start looking at, you know, getting a slightly better mic and getting a better interface, and you know, and getting the training, you know, getting coaches. Anna mentioned her coach earlier. Absolutely, you need a coach, because we come across all sorts of stuff that somebody who's been in the industry much longer than us can talk us back off the ledge and go, you know how to do this, calm down. So that would be what I would suggest, but I think everybody probably comes at it slightly differently.
Yeah, that's great advice. And you, Anna?
Yes, you know, even before spending any money on a microphone and interface, the sitting and reading for a length of time. And the issue isn't so much sitting and reading, because lots of people say, you know, I read to my kids every night, and sometimes I'm there for an hour and a half, and, you know, and my kids won't go to sleep, and it really isn't the same. The concept of being by yourself in a small space, the acoustic treatment within your space is really important. So you can't do it sat at the kitchen table. You have to be in a relatively confined space, and you're by yourself, and you're just reading. And every time you mess up a sentence, you have to go back to the beginning of the sentence. Every time you come across a word you're not very sure about the pronunciation of, you have to go look it up. So it's not about just getting through it. Everybody can read. It is about doing it sufficiently proficiently to enable an audiobook to be produced, and for people to want to listen to it, so that it'll sell well, so that the author will do well. You know, it's a whole snowball, isn't it?
Love that. And you, Fiona?
Yeah, I think TJ and Anna have already said it really. I think definitely I would, if you've not had any kind of performance training at all, I mean, obviously, if you have done sort of theatre things, it's completely different anyway, because it is a very different, you can't be really dynamic in front of a microphone because it will just sound horrendous to your listeners. So there's a lot of difference in it anyhow. But if you have got that kind of background where you do enjoy acting and you enjoy that kind of thing, I think, yeah, Anna's idea actually of just even doing it into your phone for an hour or 2 hours in a cupboard in the dark is very kind of just to see, you know. And if you can hack that, then I agree with TJ, yeah. But I think if you're wanting to go into the sort of professional thing, I think you will eventually need a condenser microphone, and that will also include an interface, which you can actually buy within bundles, and pop screens and so on, which will come together with that. But that's because it will pick up every nuance of your voice. But it will also pick up every nuance of the room, and it'll pick up, you know, your hamster scratching itself 3 doors down. So you need to, like Anna said, you do also need to be treating the space that you're going to be working in, and make sure you've got a space that is, or a studio nearby that you could hire. Some people I know do go to a local studio and they just hire that out for a certain number of hours every day, or finding a very quiet space within your home and knowing that you will have proper silence for a certain amount of time each day.
Invaluable advice. And in fact, actually, perhaps everyone will hear, and I'm certain they will, from each of your locations, Anna, you're in your studio, so the sound you can hear, it's totally swallowed up. So there is something to be said when you get to that point that you know, you need that environment. This has been incredible, and in fact there's so many messages coming in on the chat now to say thank you, so informative. Folk have loved it, so I can't thank you enough for spending this time with me. I'm excited to have you know, to have chatted to you all and learned so much. Just to close it out, pimp yourselves out. What is happening with each of you at the moment? What's your current live projects?
I'm currently doing an Emma Nichols mafia book, which I'm absolutely loving, full of Italian characters, called Cosa Nostra. It should be out hopefully by the end of September, she says. So yes, and I'm Anna Clements and Jessica Jeffries all over Twitter. I've got websites, and you know, yeah, do get in touch if anybody wants to ask any questions. I'd be more than happy. Always happy to talk about audiobooks.
Wonderful. TJ?
Yeah, I'm TJ Richards Audio on every social media platform because I love social media. I've got The Scent of Rome with Lise Gold, which is dropping any day now. We're just waiting on the word. And another one that I've done, it's the third part of a trilogy, fantasy young adult, called Undone by Ian Kaplan. And those are both hopefully dropping any day now. So yeah, lots of stuff, but please get in touch.
Wonderful. And you, Fiona?
I can't talk about what I'm doing at the moment.
Okay.
It's undercover.
I'm really excited.
That means it's a good one.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. But my most recent things are Another Cup by Debbie Member-Kupfer, which is some very, very gentle, lovely stories, and also Grave Decisions by Claire Hyton Stevenson, which came out quite recently as well. But yeah, no, I'm Fiona Thraille on Twitter and also on Facebook, and I'm also happy to chat to anyone.
Wonderful. And finally, but certainly not least, Lise. Oh, I didn't think that through, did I? What have you got coming up now, or have you just released?
In terms of audiobooks, as TJ said, Scent of Rome will be out any moment. And this year I will also be releasing, I published Madeline Taylor, which is erotica as well. So Madeline's third book, Masquerade, will be out in audio. And we will also have a Northern Vows, which is my fifth book in the Compass series, will be narrated by Addison Barnes also this year. So.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. You've been superstars. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to say to close it out, or you just buy?
Go buy audiobooks.
Go buy audiobooks. Support the video. Yeah, I love it. Thank you to absolutely everybody who's listened, watched, and popped comments in the chat box. Anything we've missed, I do apologise profusely, and we'll pop in there now to say hi and reply to anything. But thank you so much for joining us. This will stay on Facebook, and it will be on YouTube, I think, in a few days as well. It's been incredible. I think Amanda's up next. I should know the panel. Is it tropes? Oh, that's
Tropes.
bad. Is it tropes? Bad marketing. Anyway, Amanda, hang on. She's on in about an hour. So bye-bye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.